On the evening of December the 1st, 1979, Nakfa slumbered under the protection of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front defense lines, running parallel to the 28-kilometer-long Ethiopian trenches along the mountain chains. Petros Solomon, a member of the EPLF Politburo and responsible for the military high command in the Nakfa front, gives a comprehensive description of the relative positions of the two forces and the general plan of the battle. On the Ethiopian side, more than 13,000 troops, later reinforced by a newly dispatched brigade, were deployed along the whole front line. The arsenal included 63 Soviet tanks of various types, 7 artillery battalions lining 72 120mm guns, and 4 batteries of BM-21 rocket launchers. The ground forces were, moreover, bolstered by unchallenged air support. Clearly, the Ethiopians enjoyed exceptional superiority, both in numerical and material terms, and particularly so in firepower. Confident combat units of the Eritrean People's Liberation Army concentrate in the valley around the strategic mount. Valleys and deep gorges make up the rugged terrain to alphabet. The long and high mountain chains capped with Ethiopian trenches dominating the left-wing front line as far as Mount Etaleb, the furthest end. Immediately on the right, the strategic chain, key to the EPLF counteroffensive, dissecting the enemy position into 2 distinct parts, and dominating the medium overshadowed hills which harbor Ethiopian trenches. The explanation of the sweeping victory does not lie in the sophistication of armaments, but first and foremost in the prevailing high morale, level of combativity, and total readiness of the fighter to sacrifice. The rich combat experience of the Liberation Army, gleaned in 18 years of struggle, was an additional factor of considerable weight. The favorable factors have to be counterposed to fully gauge their impact with the numerous internal contradictions besetting the Ethiopian army. Contradictions between the officers and rank-and-file troops, hostilities bordering on open skirmishes between the regular troops and the militias, and discriminatory practices among the different national groups. December the 2nd. At 5 in the morning, when dawn had not fully broken yet, and the mountain tops were thickly covered by fog, thin files of liberation fighters cautiously steal away from their defense positions and advance piecemeal towards the Ethiopian trenches. Ambadenden and Kabritsada, the 2 key positions, will be captured in pitched fighting that lasted several hours. The decisive victory was virtually won at this stage with the capture of the 2 strategic positions, though the actual battles were to rage for another 15 bloody days. Having promptly mounted the front's protective artillery on this mountain, the fighters were poised for a generalized counteroffensive on the remaining entire enemy line, to dislodge and throw back the occupationist forces from the right wing of the Nakfa disposition. Simultaneously, the front opened a diversionary attack on Algena, 100 kilometers north, while in the highlands, guerrilla groups, supported by the People's Militia, disrupted Ethiopian logistics with landmines and by staging ambushes. Ethiopian losses at this stage of the battle were enormous. 1 full brigade was put out of action, 2 T-55 tanks, 8 heavy artillery pieces, and 7 military trucks were captured. Enormous quantities of material, tanks, vehicles, light arms, and ammunitions were destroyed. More than 200 troops were taken prisoner. Decisive for the course of the war was the psychological blow struck, and the confusion and state of disarray that permeated the enemy front line. The strategic withdrawals effected by the EPLF in June 1978 in the face of escalated foreign intervention and Ethiopian offensives were never a defeat or an escape, but an appropriate military phase, whose correctness can be additionally established by the resounding victory on the Nakfa front. Having once made the necessary readjustments, the EPLF had all the time been taking initiatives and containing Ethiopian advances and offensives, even if not on the present scale. The debacle of the Ethiopian Fifth Offensive, in which the regime lost over 6,000 men and huge quantities of weapons, had already ushered in the transitional period of temporal equilibrium between the two contending forces. The balance of forces was henceforth gradually tilting in the favor of the EPLF in a far more marked pace than was admitted by external observers. Etalab, on the left flank, is still in Ethiopian hands. At this point, some liberation units veered east and traveled south across the narrow plains to attack the enemy from the rear. After an arduous 12-hour journey in the night, the heroic fighters, undetected and unexpected by the enemy, launched a powerful coordinated attack on the last high position. The battle raged for 6 hours. After the one-day battle to wipe out the Ethiopian left flank, the attack to capture the remaining steep mountain progressed slowly, involving small units and successive waves of reinforcements. The rugged terrain effectively neutralized the infernal shower of 500-kilo napalm anti-personnel bombs which the Ethiopian MiG-21 and 23 jets frantically ejected. The Air Force was assigned for round-the-clock bombing missions for 11 hours a day, carrying out more than 50 sorties daily. This action did not prevent the peasants from enthusiastically participating in the rear, carrying food and ammunition to the combatants, evacuating the wounded, and building protective shelters. The central base and the headquarters with the BM-21 battery are encircled by the regrouped People's Liberation Army. During the night, the Ethiopian army starts to evacuate its materials, destroying a substantial part of them. This battle is the most important in the history of the Eritrean Revolution. It belongs to the great historic confrontations which have marked the emancipation of peoples. This battle will inevitably have great repercussions on future military and political developments. United and hardened in over 18 years of armed struggle, the Eritrean people have frustrated Ethiopia's liquidationist policies and exposed its conspiracies. The present war has sharpened the internal contradictions within Ethiopia and precipitated acute political turmoil and the instability of the regime. One EPLF unit veers to lay an ambush and intercept enemy forces retreating from the base to Alphabet. The Ethiopian troops stage an attempt to break the imposed siege. An assault is launched along a hilly section to breach EPLF lines. The venture falters and disintegrates under EPLF firepower. It's the right time to launch the final offensive on the base. The Liberation Army combatants dash from their fixed positions and engage the enemy in pitched close-range fighting. After a few hours, Bayan, the central base, falls under the complete control of the Liberation Army. At the same time, in the rear base, the Mass Department successfully concluded the founding national congresses of women and workers, in which 400 enthusiastic delegates participated in the 10-day-long sessions. Total Ethiopian losses were colossal. Thousands of troops were killed and wounded. 602 taken prisoner. 100 vehicles and 15 tanks and armored cars, as well as large quantities of ammunition and weapons, destroyed. The Liberation Army captured, all in all, 17 tanks, 7 armored cars, 97 military trucks, which will greatly enhance available services. 80 heavy weapons, 3,600 light arms, and large quantities of ammunition. During the following week, the liberation fighters were to pursue, also using newly captured weapons, the fleeing remnant Ethiopian forces, capturing all the camps along the 60-kilometer road to Alphabet, which the EPLF evacuated a year ago within the military framework of the strategic withdrawals, and presently under siege. The Eritrean people are, almost single-handedly, fighting the Ethiopian occupationist forces to attain peace and progress. A genuine and lasting peace can be achieved only through the recognition of the legitimate rights of the Eritrean people to self-determination and independence. The Ethiopian regimes have adamantly refused to recognize this right. Convinced that final victory is theirs, the Eritrean people will persevere on the road of protracted people's war.
You wanna give Eritrea.